And we are the Buffalo Niagara. We're Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council, and we're the metropolitan planning organization for the Buffalo Niagara region. As you know, previous studies on the future of the Skagit-Route 98 did not achieve a consensus to proceed. New York State turned to us and asked us to reset. Yes. Nancy.
Oh, great. Got it now.
As you know, previous studies on the future of the Skagit-Route 198 did not achieve consensus to proceed. And after that, the state asked us to reset the discussion, initiate a new form of planning process. We brought in a team of world-class consultants to assist us in this effort, led by Stantec Associates. We also expanded the study geography and named it Region Central, reflecting a broader community. We reframed the discussion. What are the attributes, aspirations, and plans for Region Central in terms of our communities, the economy, the environment, cultural organizations, et cetera, and how can we provide the right transportation mobility solutions to make that vision a reality? As we move towards creation of these solutions, today we will review clear and concise information on how we move in and around Region Central and how we will start the creation of initial scenarios for transportation mobility projects. We really appreciate your participation this evening and know that together we can create forward-looking solutions that will strengthen our region and our communities through this consensus planning process. Nancy, I'll turn it to you again to start the program.
Okay, great. Again, welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. This is our second public meeting for the Region Central project. And tonight, again, we are using a webinar format, which means that you are automatically muted and your video is turned off. We'll have a chance to get input from you through a series of polls that you'll see on your screen as we go through our presentation tonight. And also, as we go forward, please feel free to type your comments in the chat box. And also, you can put questions in the Q&A box, and you'll see those there on your toolbar for Zoom. You'll see the Q&A and the chat box. And we are recording this meeting tonight, and we will be posting a summary of the meeting, as well as the materials that you're seeing tonight will be posted, or are actually already posted, on the Region Central website at gbnrtc.org/Region Central, and we'll be posting that link for you as well. So tonight I'm going to ask David Dixon from Stantec to give an overview of the process for the project overall, and then we'll be looking at some mobility data that our team has been researching over the past few months. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nancy. And actually, I think Nancy politely understated what we're going to talk about in terms of mobility, because my good colleague Ralph Danisco is going to really spend some time looking at the hard data, as well as reporting on what we've heard about what it's like to move around and through Region Central, and has identified sort of a whole series of new perspectives that will help shape mobility planning for Region Central, on top of the discussion that really dominated the last 18 to 20 years of planning for the future of the Skagit-Route corridor. When Hal, and thank you, Hal, for your kind comments about our team, and I should say our team is a large team with a terrific group of consultants in addition to Stantec's Urban Places. But when you mentioned that that you asked us to take a new look and a different approach, I think one of the most important parts of that different approach is something, Hal, that you handed us, which is that the mission to really look at the Skagit-Route corridor not simply as a place one passes through as part of a larger regional transportation network. We can't forget that role, but to really look at it as a place in its own right, as neighborhoods, as main streets, as parks, as the Skagit-Route Creek, wonderful natural resources in their own right, to understand what perspective as we look at Region Central as a place, can help shape the planning for future mobility, the future of the Scajaquada corridor and movement to, from, and around Region Central. Next, please. So we have spent, really since last, coinciding with the start of the pandemic, the last more than a year, doing a lot of research, really talking to a great, I hope all of you on this call, but certainly a great many of you, deep dive interviews to understand your perspective, really looking at a lot of data that tells us, in some cases, a surprising story that you'll hear from Ralph about how folks use the Scajaquada Expressway, for example, but also move around Region Central into and out of Region Central, where folks are trying to get, what's working, what's not. We've had a chance to talk to just terrific institutions like the zoo and the Albright Knox Museum to understand, and Buff State, to understand the perspective of really terrifically important regional institutions in terms of how current and possible future mobility could serve them. As we move now into our current phase, we are going to use all this work to define what we call a planning framework, and I'm talking more about this in a minute, and from this generate mobility scenarios that will be built on the foundation of the work that Ralph's going to talk about tonight. Then in December through February, we're going to identify a series, very likely 3 scenarios that represent different futures for the Scajaquada Expressway itself, but also a whole bundle of mobility proposals, concepts, ideas for Region Central to see which combination really serves Region Central and the region best. Best in terms of the planning framework that we develop based on the data we've obtained and what we've learned from you. What really is going to enhance livability, economic opportunity, equity, the environment of this great part of Buffalo, as well as move people across Buffalo. And then by the end of March of this coming year, we will prepare our final recommendations and deliver them to Hal and to all of you. And believe me, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to comment as we move from where we are tonight to where we will be in March. Next, please. So one of the things that really struck us right at the start was that the discussion around the future of the Scajaquada corridor, about mobility, actually writ large across Buffalo, has been very much focused in a narrow way around just mobility. If you're a planner, one of the first things you learn is that land use and mobility should be considered together. Quality of life and mobility should be considered together. Environmental quality, historic preservation, all the things that we think about when we shape our communities should be considered together with mobility and mobility with them to identify the right outcomes. We are long past the era of siloed thinking. So what we have done is work with many of you and just a great many folks to identify 3 principal lenses, priority lenses for understanding the future, the opportunities that Region Central has, and the qualities, the values that should shape a planning framework. The first is equitable and inclusive economic and community development. This means creating opportunity and sharing it across the full community. Also reinforcing, enhancing the character of individual neighborhoods, ensuring that where folks live today, they can continue to live, and expanding housing opportunities for those who are challenged in finding housing in Region Central. At the same time, ensuring that the quality of neighborhoods that have long existed are at least maintained, if not enhanced. Replenishing the parks, parkways, waterways, the Scajaquada Creek, access to the Scajaquada Creek and its setting, its environmental quality. the wonderful, in many ways, much of this is part of the wonderful Olmsted legacy of which Buffalo is so proud, but part of it is what kinds of public realm, public spaces, access to nature do the folks of Region Central need today, and what would enhance the quality of life today. And finally, of course, how do we preserve, enhance effective, I'm going to reverse the sentence here, regional mobility and local mobility? How do you move not just through, but within Region Central to get where you need to get? So collectively, these lenses form the foundation for building a land use framework. And they also translate into a series of goals. And we're going to talk about these, I believe, at our next meeting. For example, enhanced access to the Scajaquada Creek. Expanded affordable housing, increased public health, meaning decreasing the negative impacts on public health of current travel patterns and infrastructure. So these goals will then in turn become the metrics that we'll use to evaluate mobility scenarios, which are sort of probably, again, three sort of packages of mobility recommendations, including a new and potentially different future for the expressway itself. Next, please. And again, we will evaluate these scenarios in the months, early months of 2022. But the real foundation from a mobility perspective is going to be what my good colleague Ralph Danisco is going to talk about now, which is what is it like to move in, around, and through Region Central today? And I want to emphasize, you'll get this from Ralph, that we are not only listening to all of you, that's very important, but really looking at every piece of data we can get to make sure that all of you have the best understanding of how people use the expressway today, for example, and move through, in and around Region Central. So Ralph, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. And thank you, everybody. Hello, I'm Ralph Danisco. I'm with Stantec, and I'm a transportation planner, mobility person on this collective effort, and really get to be the front man for a fabulous consultant and client team that spent a lot of time developing this document that we're going to give you a preview of today, which we're calling the Mobility Experiential Guide. And you're going to hear a lot from me over the next hour or so. Nancy will MC and tell me if I'm going too long or too short, and will interrupt me. And we'll have some breaks where we'll throw up a little bit of a poll, or we might pause for a clarifying question or two. And then I think there's some time for discussion at the end, which Nancy will moderate. But if you can go to the next slide, really what this is it's not just an existing conditions report. We've presented a lot of just hard data that was available earlier on at one of these meetings. Here we've been able to take a much more detailed and broader look at mobility in and around Region Central, with the express purpose of trying to offer a different and broader perspective on how people move in, around, and through Region Central. And I think what we're hoping this document can be is a foundation that allows us all to really kind of change and broaden the language we use around mobility, what it means and how it works, in and around Region Central. I'll talk a lot about how we've got there, and what you're seeing is often a shorter version. It's, even though I'm gonna probably go through 30 slides, this is an abbreviated version of all the material that is online already. We'll put up the link a little bit later on for the entire Mobility Experiential Guide. And what you see on the right-hand side here is just how it's structured, kind of broken it down into a few different categories. And this presentation is going to sort of follow that, where we'll look at Region Central as a whole. We'll look at the expressway corridor and how that functions, crossings. We'll look at individual neighborhoods, something on destinations, and we're trying to be very comprehensive as well and factoring in some additional analysis on how people move using different modes here. So you can go to the next slide. One of the reasons we're able to do this is through this much more broad effort. GNRTC has funded the use of what I'll call location-based services data. It's cell phone data. It's information that is aggregated and anonymized from smartphones, and it gives a much more detailed look at how people move around by mode, by time of day, by purpose. We can trace paths. We can look at where people are going. We can look at where they're not going, which is, I think, just as important here. We can look at how far their trips are. We can connect any 2 points. You'll see as we go through this, we'll look at individual destinations, we'll look at individual neighborhoods, we'll look at individual roads. But I think just should keep remembering that this is aggregated and anonymized data. We've also, in this document, that is a prime source for this, but we're also mixing and matching other data sources that we have developed through the process here. Many of them are traditional traffic counts, safety data, crash analysis, transit ridership, a whole host of other things that we've contextualized with this added tool here, and trying to tell this in a kind of story format in a way that should be less technical and easier to understand. And many of the pieces that we go through here it's not a completely exhaustive analysis of everything that we could possibly look at. We're trying to develop windows into the things that we think are important, with the knowledge that we could also look at other things if we had to, but again, very much trying to broaden out and change the conversation about how mobility works. So the next slide is going into Region Central as a whole. Nancy, I don't know if there's a point to pause if anybody had questions. You're monitoring the chat. I am not.
Yeah. Yes. Again, just to reiterate, everyone is muted and their video is turned off, but you can type in the chat any comments that you have, or if you have questions, put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer it there or a little bit later out loud. So Ralph, as we go through these sections, we have about 5 minutes for you to present, and then we'll do a little bit of a poll.
All right. And you have, again, permission to speed me up or slow me down.
Okay, that's your first.
All right, in this section, we're looking at kind of Region Central as a whole. It's the map it's the geography that Hal described and that David showed on a map here. And, again, there's more in the overall guide than we're showing here today. But this is a much broader area. It's, roughly a half mile to a mile north and south and east of the expressway. So we're getting the neighborhoods that surround it, that are impacted by it most immediately, and we're able to provide a lot more sort of context to it. So let's go to the next slide. Now, right here, right off the bat, is a different way to think about things. We're not talking about trips to work. We're not just talking about car trips. We're talking about using that location-based services data to understand all the ways people move for all the things that they move for. So every trip, whether you are, going to work, going to the doctor, going to school, going to the supermarket, going to visit your friends, going anywhere for any reason, we tried to look at what is the totality of all of those trips. And one thing that we're highlighting here is that 35% of all the trips that happen in Region Central, things that start in Region Central, are walking trips, right? 54% of them are drive alone. We've got some drive passengers, kind of a carpool. We've got bike trips in here, commercial vehicles. One thing to note also is that the relatively low percentage of trips on transit, in and around Region Central. And a good way to read these slides, they're all going to have maps or data or graphics. So try to put a headline in there, try to represent the data in some interesting way. And then that kind of speaking bubble is a little bit of what we think is a takeaway. right? So like what we think is a little interesting or, window into the data, sort of that slight next step. And again, mostly what we're going to be presenting to you today is data, and we're going to ask you how you feel about it and what you think about it. But, right here, again, what we're showing is, in Region Central, over a third of trips are walking trips, which is pretty interesting. I see the question. We're going to try to answer questions in chat, and I'll say this generally. For much of the data, unless we're specifying when it was from, we tried very hard to kind of look at, an average week or day or month within the life of Region Central. I tried to pick some times in May, and on the bottom left kind of shows you what the data specifically was from for each individual piece. And every slide might have a slightly different data source because of the vast variety of things that we're using to develop this. So I hope that helps. So let's go to the next slide. What else is interesting? So even though more than half of all trips are by driving, almost 2/3 of those trips that start in Region Central in a car are traveling less than 5 miles, right? So they're short trips. And this is, again, over the course of a whole day. This is not commute trips. This is not just what happens at 8 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon. This is over the course of a day. But almost 2/3 of all driving trips are less than 5 miles. And just for reference, we showed that all of Region Central is only 3.5 miles from east to west. And it's important because, driving trips that are that short are the most easily convertible to other modes if the facilities and the ability to do that was there. And that may or may not always be the case here in Region Central. Let's go to the next slide. What else is interesting here is thinking about how that happens temporally, right, over the time of day. And what we're showing here is all vehicle trips that start in Region Central, right? Again, we could have picked a lot of different things, but this is the sort of simplest way to look at it. And if you look at all the times that car starts in Region Central, the afternoon is the busiest time, but it's 3 o'clock, not 4 o'clock, not 5 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock. And the middle of the day is busier than what happens in the morning peak, and that activity kind of builds throughout the day. And again, we're able to do this because we've got such a vast data set to sort of explore here. And again, in this case, the denominator is all vehicle trips that start in Region Central. And we've got the hours along the x-axis. We put a little icon there to hopefully make it a little bit easier to understand. So overnight and kind of the morning commute time, the wake up time, then the middle of the day, and then the afternoon peak, and then into the evening. But when we look at other aspects of vehicular travel in Region Central and around it, they sort of also follow this pattern. So again, I think that's fairly interesting. Let's go one more. And then what we've also done here is look at aggregate daily vehicle counts. So on the expressway and along major roads in Region Central that we had consistent data for. I just sort of sum them up. And here what we're looking at is, if you follow the line and the curves, it's the aggregate volumes, going back to 1999, really through 2019, which is the latest. And what's interesting here is the volumes haven't grown, right? Vehicular volumes haven't really grown, and too often in transportation planning, you make these assumptions that traffic just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing every year, and then you bake that in, and then you have to plan and design for it. That has not been the case here. They're lower now than they've been, in a few years. And we have to think really hard about how we use this data when we go forward to the next step about how do we plan for the future of of Region Central and the Scajaquada Expressway. So I think I have one more slide in this section, and then I will turn it over to Nancy for a moment. So just some key takeaways. Again, when we look at all of Region Central, the numbers will show that non-auto travel is, almost as significant as auto travel in Region Central. And then again, surprisingly, most of those auto trips are relatively short. And then there's a real variation by time of day and by season in terms of how those trips happen. And they have not really been growing for the last 20 years. So Nancy, I think that's the last slide in this section, and then we will pause before we go to the next one.
Okay, great.
Did I do it on time?
We're doing perfect. Okay, so you should be seeing on your screen now a poll that has to do with what we just heard from Ralph about mobility in general in Region Central. And you may need to scroll down a little bit to make sure you can see all the possible choices. Please go ahead and indicate whether this information was new to you, if it was, some of it was new, if you think about it in a new way or can't be right. We're very interested in how this data matches up with your lived experience. So I see we have about half the people have taken the poll so far. So we'll just wait a couple minutes. Okay, got about 80%. All right, let's go ahead and close that poll. All right, and so there we can see that nobody answered that this just did not seem right to them, which is great. 28% of you said that this makes you think about mobility in Region Central in a new way, and be very interested if you care to share any thoughts in the chat. Please do so about, how has this changed your perception of mobility in Region Central? And looks like 20% of you say, yeah, this fits with what I know, and 35% say some is new, some is what I know. So great, we appreciate that feedback. Again, feel free to post that in the any comments in the chat. We're going to move on to our next section, which deals with expressway mobility specifically.
Thank you, Nancy. And
Yep.
and I'll just, that same poll question is going to come up after each of these sections. So I think would urge you, when you're responding in each section, to think about it relative to the information you just saw. And I think what we tried very hard to do collectively with this document is, even where this sort of confirms what you think was happening in Region Central, or in Buffalo generally, or in and around the area, that information has not existed in this form before, right? So I think as we go through the long history of in and around the Skagit corridor, there have been a lot of discussions around this stuff, but there has not been the data or the evidence or the detail to back some of those things up. And I really hope that that's what we're providing here with this document. So that's again part of the sort of express purpose of what we're doing here. And then you can go to the next slide. In this section, really looking at the expressway itself, how folks travel on the expressway, and some level of understanding the crossings and how that affects mobility in and around the area as well. Just there's some physical aspects to how everything's laid out, which intentionally or unintentionally or subtly or overtly change the way that people behave. And we're trying to understand and point that out in a way that goes just beyond how many people are going from kind of here to there. So let's go to the next one. here. And as I said, we're able to look a little bit at trip purpose, and we can get into long detailed discussions on how, and just assume that this is a pretty good window into it, even if it is not, 100% accurate about 100% of the people. But what you see here is that only 18% of the trips on the expressway are commuting trips, right? 4 out of 5 cars or vehicles on the expressway are not commuting. They're doing something else, right? They're going to the store. They're going to visit their mom. They're just traveling from here to there. They're going to the park. They're going to the museum. They're doing something that is not commuting. And too often when we think about transportation planning, what you're so focused on that journey to work trip, because that's where the data has been in the past, but we get to look a lot more broadly now. And just digging into the slide a little bit, what we're showing in the bottom left is we looked very specifically at one point, right? The expressway at Delaware Avenue, and all the vehicles that are on the expressway that drove past it in either direction. And then the bar chart using that same iconography shows the total vehicles passing that by time of day. And then in blue, which is the lower part of the bar, is the percentage of those vehicles that are commuting, right, that are making work trips. And that percentage is highest in the morning in the AM peak at 47% of folks on the expressway are going for work. But the volume of trips on the expressway is lower than it is at other times, right? So again, just another window into how things are actually kind of operating here. If you can go to the next one. The second is we're able to kind of understand in a much more detailed way the patterns. I'm going to spend some time kind of on this slide here, right? And in this case, we're looking at westbound trips, right? So every vehicle, and this is over the course of an entire day, that boarded, or that got on the expressway from the 33 headed westbound. And then, if you follow the charts, it shows you, if you follow the arrows, it shows you kind of where they got off, right? And then, the blue, the next one at, I think it's Delaware, is showing you the number of vehicles that got on at Delaware and then where they got off. The summary of this, and I'm fascinated by this, this document. We have another one in the guide for the eastbound travel, is only 8% of the vehicles that get on at the east end of the 33 go all the way to the 190. I'm going to say that again. Only 8% of the vehicles at the east end travel all the way to the 190. Many of them are getting off at other places within Region Central, right? And it works very similar for the eastbound. I think it's 18% for the eastbound that go all the way through there. But what this tells me is that the expressway primarily functions as a long on and off ramp to get to the 33 and the 190, right? There's a small percentage of people that are kind of riding it all the way through and using it for a much larger regional connection. It's a very localish focus in terms of how it operates. And we can come back to this if we need to spend time on it, because I think it's really a fascinating set of information. We hinted at this earlier in the study when we looked just at the counts, but we have much more detailed evidence of how it operates now. Let's go to the next slide, because then we dig a little bit deeper, right? And we just looked at 2 points, right? So if you use the same chart there, the same set of arrow diagrams, and you look just east of Delaware, just west of Delaware, just west of Lincoln Parkway, and then we show by color, that yellow that shows that 57% here, we're looking at Lincoln Parkway, whoever's got the control can point there. 57% of the people that get across that part of Lincoln Parkway neither start nor end their trip in Region Central, but 40% do, right? And then 3% of the people, which is that blue, are actually starting and stopping in Region Central somewhere. They're just using the Scajaquada Expressway to get from one part of Region Central to the other, right? And then we have similar information for kind of what happens at Delaware. So the kind of takeaway here is that although most expressway trips use on and off ramps in Region Central, many of them are coming from outside Region Central and funneling their way through to get to, you know, to get to one of these entries to get somewhere else, right? So again, just that understanding that it's functioning as a long on-off ramp, you know, to the parallel highway system. Let's keep going. So we've got a lot to get through here. And then we look at that from a different perspective, expressway and the creek, and just where those crossings are, right? That there's only 11 crossing locations and only 9, I think, that are vehicular crossing locations. And we're showing the distance between them. And, you know, I think part of the takeaway here is the fewer number of crossings impact how and where people have to travel, and how and where they go, and where they may not be going. And we dig into that a little bit further. And you can go to the next slide as well. And then we were able to get some more detail. We didn't have a lot of pedestrian or bicycle counts before, but using the cell phone location-based services data, we can look in a little more detail and understand where the highest levels of crossings are, you know, for bikes or for pedestrians. And in this case, Elmwood Avenue is the busiest overall crossing of the expressway. And then we're showing where some of those other, where some of those other crossings are. You know, if I were to guess, I would, you know, part of it is Buff State, but part of it is the further distance between crossings, the more likely that a particular crossing is going to have a higher demand for it, because it's serving a sort of larger geography. Let's go to the next one, because what we did then is we took a more detailed look at one of the cross streets here to understand how the expressway pattern itself, the physical geography of it, is kind of impacting things. And we looked at Main Street, right? So whoever's got the mouse control, if you can just Main Street on the diagonal there, right? And if we took, in this case, we took a point right where Main Street crosses the expressway, and the thickness of the lines that you see on this is the kind of spray pattern of how people got to that point, right? In either direction, right? So as they get closer to that point, the lines get thicker. And one thing that you see is that only 21% of driving trips that cross the expressway at Main Street start within Region Central, which tells me Main Street is as much a regional road as the Scajaquada Expressway is, right? It's serving a regional purpose. And then if you look at the map, and we didn't label all the zones, but you can sort of see downtown Buffalo in the darkest blue. Like the darker the color, that is the more people that are going to that location. Right, so Main Street, as much as anything else, is also serving a lot of folks that are going, you know, towards or all the way to downtown Buffalo. Right, so those are showing not just the paths that people take, but the ultimate destination that they're going to. So I think we're going to pause here again. The next slide should be a key takeaways slide. The top bullet, less than 20% of vehicles. That's the eastbound direction. But you know, combined, it's less than 20%. You know, again, the expressway itself primarily serves a long on-off ramp. It's I-90 and Route 33, and then just a couple of other things that I've already sort of gone over. Is that many of those vehicles are coming from outside of Region Central to access the expressway, or using the expressway to get to a place outside of Region Central. And then the limited crossings and the access creates a number of other issues. There's more detail on all of this kind of within the guide itself. So Nancy, that is again the end of this section.
Okay, great. Let's have that poll. This is the same poll as before, but this time focused specifically on what Ralph just talked about around the expressway. How does this match up with your lived experience of the expressway?
Or your understanding, how you think
or
about
what
it.
you've heard, what you thought. Yeah. Just give that a few seconds again. If if you have questions or comments about what you've just heard from Ralph, feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A. If we don't get to answer your question that you put in the Q&A, we will answer it in the meeting summary. We might need to do a little more research or whatever, and that'll be posted on the Region Central website as well. All right, can we get a couple more participants? All right, let's go ahead and close that, Charlie. Okay, so again, we have most people saying some of this is new and some of this is consistent with what I thought, and several people again thinking about mobility on the expressway in a new way, and other people finding it consistent. So that's great. Again, we'd love to hear, you know, what kind of new thoughts this brings up for you, or if you find this interesting, or if you don't find this interesting, please let us know. We spent a little extra time on the expressway because that's obviously of a concern to a lot of folks. So we'll want to take a little less time on some of the others, Ralph.
All right.
Now into the next section. Yeah.
All right. And I mean, I do hope everybody finds this interesting. And as transportation planners, I'm going to tell you, I find this fascinating because we haven't produced, nor have I seen a document like this before. So, you know, you guys are really getting a preview of a different way of thinking about mobility that really doesn't have a lot of precedent to it, but it's a fabulous tool that's going to continue to guide, I think, our collective conversations going forward. Here we're going to focus on neighborhoods, and I'm using the word neighborhoods liberally. We've divided the area into analysis zones, transportation analysis zones. We labeled them as neighborhoods mostly for reference. So please, you know, if this doesn't quite match what your exact description of a particular neighborhood is, just know that it was done for transportation purposes, and it's just a way to aggregate a lot of the data. So let's go to the next one. So here in this case, we're able to look at pedestrian trips and divided them into three categories. So pedestrian trips that would originate in each zone, and the larger percentage in that kind of maroon is trips that stay within their neighborhood. That kind of aqua color is trips that go to other neighborhoods on the same side of the expressway. So you go from, you know, one street to another, one neighborhood to another, and then in that yellow is trips that cross to the other side of the expressway. And I think what you notice is that there's relatively few trips that cross the expressway as pedestrians, and partially that's, you know, I would think that's because of distance. It's partially because of access. It's partially because it's going to take a lot of time to walk from one side to the other. And maybe it's because there's more or less stuff that you want to get to in those neighborhoods, which I think speaks overall to all of the things we're trying to accomplish here. I would note, though, that when we looked at this in some detail, most of those trips were oriented towards the expressways, right? So if you were on the north side, you tended to go towards the expressway. If you're on the south side, tended to go towards the expressway rather than the other way. So those of you who are watching me on video, and I apologize, but I talk a lot with my hands. You know, I think that's I see in the comment, yes, trips stay on the same side because the expressway is a barrier. Yes, but now we're proving it with data. Let's go to the next section, because, you know, here we can do this with all of the neighborhoods, but we tried to pick a few. And if we're looking here at vehicular trips from what we're calling the Fillmore-Leroy neighborhood, and again, similar to what we showed on Main Street, the colors show where those trips are going. And what you can see is that if you started in that neighborhood, for the most part, you're not going, even in driving, to neighborhoods on the south side of the expressway within Region Central, right? It just doesn't seem that's a place where people are going even when they're driving. You know, you're sort of subconsciously, you know, drawn to places that are sort of easier to get to. And then we looked at another neighborhood on the Upper West Side on the next slide. You know, whereas in this case, you see a different kind of pattern for where those trips are going. And again, these are driving trips that originate in that neighborhood over the course of an entire day, but they're much more kind of north-south oriented and less east-west oriented. So again, this is just, I think in our minds, a way that the physical geography of how things are organized today is affecting the travel behavior in any particular neighborhood, right? And we're able to explore that at some level of kind of detail. And Nancy, see, I went fast through this section, right? There's a key takeaway slide here coming up.
Great.
And again, some of these key takeaways refer to data that's in the larger guide. For example, we looked at the percentage of non-work trips in each neighborhood, and none of them are more than 25%. So their non-work trips are 75% of trips in each neighborhood. I think we tried to look at kind of what is the interaction between places, and because when we build towards what do we want this place to look like, that may be a thing we want to fix or we don't want to fix, or we want to fix in this place but not that place. And those are discussions we need to sort of keep having. Nancy, I don't know if we have a poll after this one.
We do have a poll specifically about this mobility within neighborhoods. Same poll as before, but specifically around this section.
Yeah.
And we have been getting a lot of comments to the in the chat about the expressway and being difficult or unpleasant to cross by walking or biking, and or dangerous. And that's, I think, consistent with some of this data we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, and Nancy, I know that's consistent with what you've been hearing, we've all been hearing through the community process to date. I don't think any of that's a surprise. I think what we have is actual measurable evidence of what that means on the ground, right? In a way that we have never had before.
Okay. Still getting in a few answers on our poll.
All right, I think we have 2 more sections to go through, and I will do my best to do them relatively quickly to respect folks' time. And I know they'll be right after this meeting going to download the full guide and spending the rest of their evening with it.
All right, Charlie, let's go ahead and close that poll. You can see that again, the majority of people, or at least the most often chosen one, is that some of this is consistent and some of this is new, which is great. We're really glad to be able to bring this data to this process. And I do see some comments in the chat also about this being refreshing and interesting and so forth. So thanks for those comments. And now we'll have this section, and then we have one more poll.
Right, and actually I saw in the chat, somebody asked earlier about destinations. So yeah, this is the thing we were very interested in as well, and we're able to get, just because of the way the data is structured, we had to pick some destinations, and we're limited into the number of places we can pick. So we chose 10 kind of regional institutions, educational, cultural, within Region Central. You see those mapped here. In this case, the size of the dot represents the number of daily trips to that destination. So you see the 2 busiest, the 2 largest attractors, right, we'd say in transportation terms, are Buff State and the Erie County Medical Center within Region Central. And then, certainly all the rest of the locations, are popular in their own ways. And again, this is an average day in May 2019. We're looking at, and those little icons show that in this case, we looked at the number of trips to them by all modes, right? So these are not just driving trips. And again, we go back and forth for various things. And the reason I'm saying that is because the next slide looks at driving trips, right? So here, if we just looked at driving trips to these destinations, and the colors in the pie chart are in the maroon, the percentage of trips to that destination that used the Scajaquada Expressway, and in yellow, the percentage of trips that did not use the Scajaquada Expressway. They used other roads. to get here. And what's really interesting about this is for all of these destinations, the majority of drivers to them did not use the Geographic Expressway, right? Whether that matches what people think or don't think, you know, it's something I think we get to talk about. We get to ask you survey questions about. But we found this particularly kind of interesting as well. And again, this is all trips over the course of a day, right? If you wanted to look at it at 7 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon or 11 o'clock at night, you could do that also. But you know, for I think for the purposes here, we really just tried to aggregate it over the course of the day. And then if you go to the next slide, we look a little bit further. We just picked one of the destinations, in this case, Buffalo State, and tried to do that same sort of spray pattern about where are people coming from, you know, by direction. And here it's all over the place, right? I mean, you can see the, you know, the kind of aqua bluish spread around the region, you know, with a couple of concentrations that are a little higher than others, but then we kind of aggregated those directions. You know, what you see is, you know, it's about a quarter from everywhere, right? 23% are coming from within region central, 24% from the north, 26% from the south, 21% from the east. And again, we can do this for any of the other destinations. In this case, we showed it for here, but, you know, 3/4 of the trips, the driving trips to Buff State are coming from outside region central. And again, let's go, the next slide is just the key takeaways. You know, certainly there are significant regional destinations. This is an important place with regional significance. That second bullet I find really interesting. And then the last bullet is, you know, it's not that, you know, if we looked at other destinations, maybe it's a little more peaked in one direction or another, but I think for the most part, the institutions and the destinations here are regional truly, in the sense that they're attracting folks from, you know, throughout the Buffalo region. So Nancy, do we have a poll for this one as well?
This is our last poll that we have, yes. And this is our poll about regional destinations. We, yeah, close here. All right, thanks. Okay, this time we did have somebody say that they just didn't think this information could be right, and we'd be very interested in sort of what your perception is of why that might be, or in what way it doesn't match up with what you believe. So please feel free to put that in the chat. Let's see, most of these people again are saying, yeah, some of it's new, some of it's not. So thank you very much.
Nancy, when we get to a more discussion component here, I think it'd be really interesting to talk about the responses to, like, that second response, which gets a lot. It's consistent with what I thought, but kind of how much this actually validates what you already thought and puts it into words, I think would be fascinating. This last piece, and when you get to the full guide, we kind of did a number of other selective analyses, right? So they're by mode, or they're about a particular thing that maybe don't fit in the other sections, but you know, we're able to do it. We think they're really fascinating. One of them is about transit. And here, you know, again, I'm trying to understand why or why not. And if you just look at these two neighborhoods, between Grant neighborhood and the Elmwood Bidwell neighborhood, right? The blue lines are the actual transit lines. You know, the NFTA lines that run through here. And one thing you see is even between these two neighborhoods, there's 4,800 daily vehicle trips, but there is no direct transit service between those two neighborhoods, right? So if you say, why don't more people take transit between them, even though they're close? That's why, right? You're gonna go down to, I think it's Delavan, to be able to take the bus between them. And by the time you're doing that, you're walking or driving or biking or doing something else. And I think as we look at any particular neighborhoods and we develop potential solutions, transit's going to be a part of that, and the ability to have more direct connections, or understanding why the absence of them might be affecting how people travel, I think is important for what we're doing here. It's the same on the next slide, where you'll hear much more about this as we move forward, about access to the park and to the creek. And here we've sort of mapped all of the various ways that people can get or directly around any of those points, because this access is incredibly important, right? We've heard this through 20 years of planning processes. We've heard it absolutely through this process, and the ability to build off of and create more of those options is something that I think we need to keep being extraordinarily mindful of, sort of as we move forward. And then I think the last slide is about freight and truck trips on the expressway. We have to understand the full character of all the things that happen and might happen and need to happen here. And one thing you look at, in this case, we're looking at the overall distance of truck trips on the expressway. So the way to think about it is, all the trucks that were on the expressway over the course of the day, we're able to see how long their trip is, from one point to the other. It's anybody who was on the expressway here. And it's kind of the opposite of the passenger vehicle trips, right? Because almost half of truck trips are traveling over 20 miles. They are making regional connections. And we put, the bar chart just shows, how many miles those trucks are traveling as part of their whole trip. And then we just put those little characters on there just to, contextualize it a little bit. So 5 to 10 miles is probably something that's happening like right in Region Central, versus things that are regional or, much more regional or sort of even national. But, in the bubble, we're also pointing out that many of these truck trips are longer trips, and they're using the Scajaquada Expressway, but the Scajaquada Expressway is a small part of their overall trip. It's only 3.5 miles. So if you're traveling 50 miles, 100 miles, 25 miles, that 3.5 miles is actually not a big part of your kind of overall trip. And I think we have one more key takeaways slide here, which probably most of the things I just said. So Nancy, I don't know if we have a poll here. I think you said we do not.
We do not have a poll for
or
this one, but we're going to be. But thank you, Ralph, for all of that great information. Once again, I want to remind everyone that this information and a whole lot more is available in the complete mobility experiential guide, and that is available at the link you see in the chat, which is gbnrtc.org/Region Central. So that's up there now, and you can download it. We'll also be posting this recording later if you'd like to review it. And we're going to have just a little bit of discussion now, but in the interest of, if anyone needs to drop off, I would like to just, Jeff, if we could just take a look at the next steps. I just want to kind of review with everybody what comes next after this. So Ralph and the project team will be developing 3 different scenarios for Region Central. And our next public meeting, which will happen in early December, will be in person. It'll be in the form of an open house workshop type of thing, where you can come and look at the different scenarios that the project team has come up with based on this data, based on the input we've heard from all of you. And in December, we'll also be doing a community survey. And all of you who've registered for this event tonight are on our list now, so you will get notified about that meeting and about the survey. And again, in the meantime, please feel free to go to the Region Central site online and download the experiential guide, and you can also comment on there. Feel free to share that with others, and people can sign up to be on our list there on that website as well. So I'll go over this again later, but just wanted to get that in before anyone needs to go up, jump off the call, but we do have some time for discussion. So yeah, so I'd say I think we have enough time that if you'd like to raise your hand to ask a question, go ahead. I'm going to limit everybody to just a few minutes of talking time. But you can also post a question in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will get to it as we can. So the floor is now open for discussion. And someone did ask me how many participants are on this. We've had up to like 97. We don't have quite that many anymore right now, but we're so around 95 participants tonight.
Nancy, we do have 2 people who have raised their hands.
Oh, okay, great. Let's see. Okay, Alan, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I thought the last data regarding the truck trips was especially interesting and informative. One of the design challenges for remaking, especially the Scajaquada part of Region Central, is that it goes through the park, which presents a whole host of unique design challenges that you might not have in other cases where you're looking at remaking an expressway. And it raises the question of whether a lot of those truck trips may be originating on the connecting expressways and going to a destination in Region Central, maybe one of those big institutions like Buffalo State or ECMC. And it raises the question of whether you might consider as an option just banning trucks from the park section of the Scajaquada corridor, assuming that the trucks could still access those institutions for deliveries, from the eastern connecting expressway or the western connecting expressway. And maybe that would simplify options for remaking the expressway in the park section.
Absolutely. And Nancy, I don't know if you want me to just jump in and respond.
Yes, please.
Great. Absolutely, every bit of data in this is meant to inform this kind of community discussion and what is included in the various scenarios that we will be analyzing, right? I think, and the comment you made, I think is dead on about that. I'm just on my other screen here. I've got up the full experiential guide, and just I think to your point, 61. We have another slide in the guide when you all get to look at it in more detail, but 61% of truck activity on the expressway neither starts nor ends in Region Central. So almost 2/3 of it is completely sort of pass through truck traffic on the expressway. So that is also something that we looked at.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments at this time? Feel free to raise your hand. Just wait a minute here and see. I don't. Okay, yes. We have a question about, can we email comments from tonight? And if so, to whom? Absolutely, you can. You can send those, you can either send those through the website, or you can send them to the Region Central email address. Give me 1 second. Amy, can you remind me what that email address is?
They can probably just send it to me. It's aweymouth@gbnrtc.org or through the Region Central website.
Yeah, and on the Region Central website, there is a place to click and it'll go to Region Central at gbnrtc.org. So feel free to send it there as well. Okay, Charlie, do we have any hands up?
And Nancy, if we don't, I mean, just a kind of teaser question. I don't know if you want folks.
Mhm. Yeah, sure.
Or if anybody has, wants to chime in, I guess, that sort of idea that even where this is confirming things that people know, having the data and the information around it, I think is, I think that's important. I think our team collectively thinks that's important for how we proceed going forward. That may be something we want to dig into a little bit more. And again, what we're showing tonight is a taste of what's in the overall guide, which is a taste of all the other data that we have behind it. So if there are other particular things that, we've always understood, but never been able to talk about it in a real way, I think that's something worth reacting to. And I can expand more, but I'll stop.
We do have a couple of other questions in here. One is, what are the geographic boundaries of Region Central? And maybe Jeff, you could go back to that picture. And Ralph, you could just talk a little bit about how that's defined for purposes of this analysis.
Yeah, I mean, what we looked at is, and I'm going to apologize because I may not get all the roads correct. But what we're showing here is essentially the a half mile to a mile, using as many major roads as we could around the Geographic Expressway, the sort of the kind of sphere of influence, if you will, or sphere of immediate influence around there, in terms of mobility data. So as places where you would want to get that much more kind of detailed look. But obviously, we went beyond that for some of this analysis, right, where we looked more regionally about where people are coming from or going to. But this is maybe the area where we took a much more detailed, and focused, kind of block by block, street by street, quarter by quarter look.
Someone is asking whether there's a historic document available that shows the neighborhood before the expressway. And I know that there are plenty of pictures and so forth. I don't know if we have made anything that we have on that publicly available. Does anyone on the project team know?
Nancy, Mike Godfrey here. We do have quite a lot of historic images, photos, aerial images, atlases, maps, etc., which are obtained from publicly available sources such as the library and the New York Heritage websites. And then we can talk about how to make that information even more public.
Okay, we can share some of that on the website. Thanks for that question. Someone asked, is a branch of light rail on the table? So I'll go back to Ralph for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the scenarios have the ability to include lots of different things. I think that's part of the discussion we need to continue to have about, is that worth evaluating further compared to other things that we might also do. Yeah, I would urge, I think on many things, as we move into the scenarios, this is just guidance from my own experience, is always think about the thing we're trying to accomplish in the scenarios as much as the actual, the physical way to accomplish that, right? Is light rail versus a bus rapid transit versus a frequent bus, the better thing to do because it better connects this place to that place or this area to another part of the city. I think we have more of the language to be able to understand what that desire is. And that's the way I would think about focusing it.
We do have a question about, can you give us any hints as to what might be included in a typical mobility scenario? I don't know if we can at this point or not.
I mean, I think we can talk generally, and others can certainly chime in, but I think there's, and we've said this at previous public meetings, the end result is a design approach to the Scajaquada corridor, right? That talks about the kind of facility that should be there, what it would be meaning to accomplish, how it would be aligned and how it would look and how it would function. And then I think it's that additional mobility elements, at least from a mobility focus, the additional mobility elements that would make that possible. So improvements to other roads, new connections, new bicycle facilities, new sidewalks, new crossings, new transit facilities, policy changes, certainly thinking about, emerging smart mobility and what that means and how that affects, the potential level of travel or vehicular volumes in the future, I think are all things that will be baked into the various scenarios, which again, and just to get back to what was presented earlier, the elements of those scenarios will be evaluated against the lenses and the metrics that David was describing, right? How much do these scenarios that are developed accomplish or impact the other things that we care about, right? That's where we're going. That's what we tried to outline kind of a little earlier in this presentation. Nancy, Hal, others, I don't know if that's the correct answer to that question.
Actually, Hal has his hand raised.
Oh, there you go. All right.
So, Hal?
Thanks, Ralph. Pretty good description there, Ralph. And thanks, Paul. That's excellent question. And I want to thank everybody for willing to take a very different look at how we plan for transportation. Things you've heard tonight sound different from what you've heard in the past. And we're trying to find a different way, one, that we can think about these things, plus have enough data and empirical evidence so that we all proceed to discussing this with a good base of information versus just strictly emotion. As we develop scenarios, as opposed to picking some things to test, what we wanted to do is look at what are we trying to do in terms of all the things that we're trying to do in Region Central in terms of the economy, the environment, the ability to advance our equity quotients, and then knowing that what kind of mobility solutions would help us achieve those. So then we can start to look on what do we want from this column, what do we want from that column, how would that help us get there? And then we can compare that in the columns against, is that making that better or worse? And then start to get to some kind of combined solution, both in terms of the expressway, parallel arterials, other mobility solutions that starts to look like a kind of answer that would get us to where we want to be.
Okay. And we also had a question here. Do you expect that the data you've examined would remain consistent in the post-pandemic era?
So we actually, it's a really good question, and it's probably something I should have touched on earlier. Most of the location-based services data that we have goes back to, I think it's 2018. And for the most part, the data we showed was 2019, which is pre-pandemic data, right? We could, and have in certain instances kind of looked at, how that's changed. Obviously, travel and volumes in all modes have been down, at various points in the pandemic. Certainly show signs throughout Buffalo and the world of coming back to pre-pandemic numbers. But for the sake of what we showed here today and what's in the experiential guide, it is almost entirely pre-pandemic data. And it's described on each of the slides, kind of what the source is or what we used or looked at. But it's a great question. And I'm sorry, I should have clarified that earlier. To the end of pandemic, if I don't have to think about it at level at every conversation.
Ralph, and if everyone can hear me, let me add a quick postscript. And this is national data, but there is a lot of national data that basically, in effect, says that what the pandemic did was accelerate a trend that had been underway basically since 2000 toward increased hybrid work, people spreading out their peak AM and PM commutes over a broader period of time, coming in for part of the day and heading home. So if anything, and this is pure conjecture, the pandemic clearly commuter trips downtown will come back to something more like they were before the pandemic, which is, and again, Ralph has said this data is pre-pandemic, but in terms of what we're experiencing now, but probably not to the level in terms of commute trips that, particularly peak hour commute trips that occurred before the pandemic. And please ask if that did not make sense.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? People who'd like to raise their hand? We just have a couple of minutes left. Okay. Well, Jeff, let's just go one more time to that next steps slide. Just to reiterate that the next thing is the development of the mobility scenarios, and we will be having an open house type in-person workshop in early December to introduce these scenarios to the public and to get feedback. And so just by being on this call, we have your email, and so we will be alerting you to when that's going to be happening. The information about that will be coming out fairly shortly. And there will also be a survey. So we hope that you will help us spread the word about both that meeting and the survey so that we can get input on that. And again, please download the experiential guide at gbnrtc.org/regioncentral, and you can make comments there as well. All right. Again, we appreciate everyone coming out tonight and appreciate all of your thoughtful comments and your close attention, and look forward to seeing you at a future event.
And we want to thank Lewis in particular for his kind comment about retirees, but also point out that as a hybrid work model is expanding, more and more folks are working from home more of the time. More and more of these folks want to live closer in neighborhoods like Region Central, because the community they don't find at work, they now seek to find in a lively, walkable, mixed-use neighborhood. And these folks do go out for lunch and early bird specials also. Anyway, thank you all for attending.
All right, thank you. And good